may remind you that your hand luggage should be placed in the overhead compartments, and in the interests of safety, heavy bags or bottles must be placed underneath the seat in front of you, and all aisles and exits must be kept clear. Thank you.
As the announcement says, welcome aboard this demo flight of the CaptainSim 727. This is my first time flying the 727, so I thought what better way to introduce myself to the golden age of aviation than with this add-on from the golden age of flight simulation. We're just setting up the autopilot for our flight. We've dialed in our cruising altitude, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and I've dialed in the heading of our destination. When it comes to climb and descent, there's no real climb mode or VNAV in this plane. There isn't even vertical speed, you literally just dial in the amount of degrees you want the nose to point up into the autopilot. As for navigation, you can fly direct in heading mode as we're doing, or you can follow radio beacons along your route which have to be dialed in one by one as you reach them. There's certainly no LNAV or GPS mode here. The radio frequency we're dialing here is the frequency of the ILS at our destination. This plane will follow a localizer and glideslope all the way down to the runway. We'll also switch on the transponder, it doesn't really matter because we're not flying online or anything like that. With that, throttle's up and we're good to go. We'll listen to the built-in crew voice callouts as we take off here.
3 engines normal. 80 knots.
Check.
V1. Rotate 13 degrees. Positive rate of climb.
Don't sink.
Gear up, please.
Don't sink.
So immediately after takeoff, we throttle down to stay below 250 knots. I've now switched on the autopilot to follow our desired heading and attitude, and we set flaps to 0.
Flaps in.
Flaps in running. Flaps in.
And the after takeoff checks.
I'm slowly releasing the backward pressure on the yoke as the auto trim catches up to the desired attitude. It's not like an Airbus where you just let go of the stick as soon as you press the autopilot on button. With everything set, we're on a nice steady climb and we shouldn't have to touch the throttle while our attitude remains the same. Back to the topic of navigation, I believe some 727 models were fitted with an INS, so if you have a third-party INS plugin, you could use that to drive the heading indicator and simulate this functionality. Above 10,000 we'll bring the throttles fully forward and then bring them back a little bit just so we don't go over speed during the climb. Top of climb also works differently to any modern airliner that you're used to. Remember we set our desired cruise altitude at the start of the flight. Well, the plane doesn't automatically level off when it reaches that altitude. You get an alarm about 1,000 feet before, and then when you reach the target altitude, you just flick on the altitude hold mode. The plane then settles at its cruise altitude and you can adjust the throttle for that phase of flight. Once the throttle is set, you shouldn't need to change it again until top of descent. If you're looking for a low-cost way to get into flying old airliners like the 727 before dropping big bucks on a modern add-on, this is a great way to do it. It has all the correct functionality for a pilot, and it also has a fully modelled overhead and flight engineer panel. This add-on was actually built for Flight Sim 2002, but with a patch it works fine in Flight Sim 2004, which is what we're using here. As we get near top of descent, which you have to work out the old-fashioned way, we'll dial in our bottom of descent altitude. We'll also dial in our desired 5-degree pitch down for our descent. At top of descent, we switch off altitude hold, the plane begins its 5-degree pitch down, descends at around 3,000 feet per minute, and we bring the throttles back to idle. The plane actually begins to slow down as it descends, so we'll apply flaps to suit our speed on the way down. At bottom of descent, the alarm sounds and we press altitude hold to level off. It's quite challenging to level the plane off at bottom of descent as you're balancing pitch, throttle and flaps. We let the plane naturally decelerate to approach speed and apply approach flaps and gear to keep it level and balanced. This also makes sense as we're very close to our destination airport and about to vector for approach. During these turns, speed will fluctuate, but leave the throttles alone as it will always return roughly to where you want it to be. Once we're on course to intercept the localizer, we can switch the autopilot over to localizer mode. It will follow our current heading until it intercepts. I will also dial in the course of our destination runway on the HSI. With localizer captured, we'll put the plane into auto approach mode so it will also start to follow the glide slope. The lack of automation makes this plane very difficult to handle on approach. It's very easy to get too high, too low, too fast or too slow on the slope. But of course it is possible to get into a nice stable approach as we've managed to do here. You can either fly the ILS all the way down to the runway, or you can take over at the last 400 or 500 feet, turn off the auto servos and land it yourself. As we reach minimums here, let's watch the landing from outside the airplane. I hope you enjoyed this demo flight of a very old airplane. If you did, please drop a like and feel free to subscribe as I make this kind of content fairly regularly. Take care and I'll see you next time.